This morning, gosh, you sound awful. This morning, as previously suggested, I want to start a series on Abraham. In many ways, the father of three different world religions, and perhaps monotheism in general, if you squint hard enough. So, if you have your Bibles with you, turn to Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 27. I will be using the New Living Translation as usual. So Genesis 11:27. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. Lord, we come before you this day to ask for your blessing on this service, to hear from you and from your word, that we all may be a little wiser at the end of this service. Amen. As with much of the Old Testament, we are in the middle of the genealogy, tracing the history of the world, as it were, from father to father. And you can find a billion fascinating things if you just read through these genealogies slowly and carefully. One of the most annoying things you can find is the similarity in names. Here we have, I wonder if the camera can still capture me from here.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Here we have Terah, who's the father of Nahor of Haran with one R. Later on in this chapter, Nahor and his, let's start again. Terah is the father of a guy named Haran. Later on in the story, Terah moves to a place called Haran, but with two R's. So it's presumably named after someone completely different from a completely different family. So if you're not careful, you can get some really weird family dynamics in the Bible if you're not keeping track of the fact that more than one person has a name. If you read an account of my family, it would say John, the grandfather of Jennifer, and John, the brother of Jennifer. So you gotta watch for the extra H in there. Terah, father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. Verse 28. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father, Terah, was still living. Then, as now, life is dangerous. It's not safe. You'll probably not make it out alive. And sometimes, as tragic as it is, a child can die before their parent, which may have something to do with the choices that his father Terah makes. Can I get the next slide? Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. Okay, so maybe you can get some pretty weird family dynamics no matter how you understand the genealogy. Chapter 30, verse 30, sorry. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. If I can find it here. One day Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. So I wonder if the earlier death of his son played a big part in Terah's decision to leave his homeland. And it is interesting that it is Terah who moves, who gets the family to up and leave, and not Abram himself. We, or at least I, think a lot and talk a lot of Abram having the faith to leave his homeland, to strike out because God told him to move and settle somewhere else. But it's interesting that it starts with Abram's father, actually, with Terah leaving the land of Ur and coming to Haran. And then, after Terah's death, Abram himself moving on from Haran to where they were originally setting out for Canaan. And this should strike a chord with us nutty Americans. Because in a lot of ways, this is what our culture and society is based on. Entire families getting up and moving, striking out on adventure for the promise, the hope of a better land, a better life. And this, in a lot of ways, is a frontier kind of story, a frontier kind of life. Abraham is only 10 generations removed from the flood, if I did my math correctly, and only 6 generations removed from the Tower of Babel, the splintering of humankind and civilization into many different groups across the earth. More and more modern historians and archaeologists are starting to believe that our ancestors moved around a good deal more than we once thought they did. That just in general, humans have always had a desire to see what's on the other side of that hill, to strike out and explore. Everything from a African king who predated Mansa Musa attempting to make it to the Americas, to Chinese treasure ships off the coast of Africa while Rome was still a thing. Humankind in general has apparently always had this desire to set out and explore, to conquer the Old West, as it were. And this wasn't any different in Abraham's time. He's lost a brother, his father's lost a son, so the family's going to move. They're going to leave behind where they've settled and head for Canaan land and the promise of something better. I believe from there it's into Hebrews. Yeah. Hebrews chapter 11 with verse 13. All these people died, still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. And like I said, this is a very American kind of story. A very, at least an American interpretation. All these people, from Terah to Haran to Abraham to Lot, died still believing what God had promised them. They lived and died hoping for a country, a better place, a new frontier. And suddenly we're Star Trek. Oh. But the principle is still sound, this idea that they stepped out on faith, as it were. And I think this is almost beyond believing for us modern people, except within the context of the American history of the West and settlers and colonizers and all of that. Because let's be honest, we can't do this today. If I were to up and move to Mongolia, I'd still have a pretty good idea of what I was getting into. I can Google it. I can read a dozen books on it in my local library. I can email someone who lives there. There's all kinds of ways I can find out what I'm doing before I do it. But obviously, Abraham doesn't have that luxury. The world itself, just 10 generations ago, which to be fair is a couple hundred years at this point, but the world itself was radically changed with the flood. This is almost another popular story for us Americans. This is still within the time frame of being borderline post-apocalyptic. The old world, the one that Noah and his sons may have preserved with stories and histories, is gone, completely washed away. So Abraham may not know much about Canaan besides whispered rumors of Ham's descendants and the kingdoms they had created. Half-remembered stories of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages. It'd be terrifying. It'd be absolutely, for someone who spent almost his entire life just in Dayton Valley, there is a sense you get when you're a little kid out on vacation in the strange and bizarre world of California, of just sleeping in tents and eating meals cooked over campfires instead of microwaves. This sense of the unknown, of being outside of the world you know. For a large part of my life, it's from Dayton to the grandparents' house and church, and that's more or less the little world that I lived in. Occasional trips up to Reno and everything, but just going over to California, seeing and experiencing this new world that you know so little about. And that's when you're a spoiled American kid who studies thousands of years of history and geography every day. There's no history here. The entire world was destroyed not too long ago. So this is a complete unknown. This is meaning no disrespect towards modern missionaries. This is so different from what they do. And perhaps it's harder on modern missionaries when they know what they're getting into, when they know the kind of comforts and benefits and privileges they're giving up to go to somewhere that is so underprivileged, comparatively speaking. But Abraham doesn't even know that. He doesn't know what he's going to face in this new land he's been called to. All he has is faith, is a promise from God. And I think that's what draws so many people around the world to the story of Abraham. Verse 14. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. It's an interesting little diatribe that God is not ashamed to claim pioneers as his own. Physically, obviously, but also spiritually. Humans can sometimes promise something to another human, and then because they're an imperfect, broken human, fail to uphold that promise, and then would be embarrassed by someone else pointing it out. Politicians presumably do not appreciate it when you show them pictures of their campaign speeches and point out, hey, you literally didn't do any of this. God doesn't have that problem. God doesn't have that shame or that fear, because he knows every promise he makes is true. He knows if he tells you to go here and do this, that if you go there and do that, it will work for you. He knows that what he says will happen, which must be nice. And of course, it's not only a physical promise, but a spiritual one. Just as he can ensure to Abraham that this Canaan land he's going to will be flowing with milk and honey, he can assure Abraham that if he follows God and is faithful and keeps his word, that God will bless him. It's two very different but kind of similar ideas. This idea of moving home and becoming a follower, a faithful member of God's family. Of leaving something old and comfortable behind, like where you were born and raised, for the promise of something new. And leaving something old and comfortable, like your lifestyle of sin, for something new and unknown and terrifying. And the creator of the universe pulls up on your doorstep and says, hey, you want to be friends? That's a terrifying proposition. That is something that should probably not be taken lightly any more than moving. Hundreds of years ago, when our ancestors got in their covered wagons and headed west, on the off chance that they could find some gold before they got offed by angry natives or the weather or other gold seekers. That's an incredibly scary proposition that shouldn't be taken lightly. But Abraham and his entire family were willing to do it, willing to pull up their covered wagon equivalents and set out for a promise of something better, a land of milk and honey and a personal relationship with the creator of the universe. Back in Genesis,
The next chapter begins with, the Lord had said to Abraham, leave your native country, your relatives and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. It's interesting that God tells him to leave his father's family. And given all the trouble that he gets involved in with Lot tagging around, not only with having a falling out with Lot, but getting involved in a war for Pete's sake over his nephew, perhaps he would have been better if he had left all of his father's family behind. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you.
Oh, what an incredible promise. And what a fulfilled promise. There's hardly anyone ever on earth who can claim they haven't had some benefit from Abraham's family. And of course, he cheats in that he had a ridiculously long family lineage. Like everyone who's anyone in the Middle East can claim some kind of heritage from Abraham. But again, 3 major religions off of this guy. And just all the good that Christianity has done. From getting rid of gladiator combat in ancient Rome to almost single-handedly wiping out cannibalism in the modern world, to every Saint so-and-so's children's hospital. This is a promise that will be fulfilled over the coming thousands of years. And that's an incredible thing for God to tell Abraham. To tell him that the world, I'm not only going to take care of you and yours. I'm not only going to see your family through this. I'm not only going to take care of you in this big, scary, dangerous world, but I'm going to make sure the entire world is blessed because of you. That because of your faith, your decision to trust me, I will see to it that every family everywhere gains something from this, benefits from Abraham and his family. That's an incredible promise. And I think it's perhaps sometimes taken too lightly. Again, us Americans in our chosen one stories are one man destined for glory. Abraham did it first.
Verse 4, so Abraham departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai. I'm sure I could pronounce that if I could speak clearly. So he took his wife, what's-her-face, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abraham traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At the time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites.
What a strange idea, Canaanites in the land of Canaan. And what a strange idea that you could use a tree as an important landmark. My, how the times have changed.
I suppose to conclude, because I've already gone past what the notes I put up on the TV are, back in Hebrews, the so-called faith chapter, back at the very beginning of that chapter, verse 1, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. I'll go ahead and do the second verse. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation.
Which seems a bit odd that that's what's pointed out. I suppose this is where our American culture fails us. For these people, both in the New and Old Testament, a good reputation would be everything. Before the internet, before quick communication, before the telegram, a good reputation would be critically important. Nowadays, everyone hates everyone, and pretty much everyone has some kind of a bad reputation in every corner. But back in these days, when the only people you knew were the people you see face to face on a regular basis, of course reputation would matter.
You'd want people to trust you. You'd want people to like you. You'd want people to be willing to. So it's by faith they gain great reputation. Would be a great promise for these people. And your entire family being offered a great reputation. And who can say Abraham's doesn't? I don't think there's anyone in the world that would say Abraham's family doesn't have a famous reputation, if not necessarily a good one. But the first verse, the important part, which is why I put it up on the TV, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. I almost like the King James version of that verse better. There's actually a lot of verses that I like better in the King James, even though it's a little hard to understand, though that might just be because the wording in the King James is what got turned into songs, so it's what gets stuck in your head for weeks after reading it. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the evidence of things we cannot see. And that's all it is at the end of the day, is faith. That's how all of us operate it, even when we don't think about it, even when we are picking up our entire family and moving hundreds of miles away into unknown territory. We still operate, we still live by faith. Even those who aren't saved at all, they still have faith. When they get out and get in their car and drive to work, they have faith that they won't crash and die on the way. To be dramatic about it. People have to operate in this modern and cynical culture. I think it's important for people to remember that they still live their lives based off of what they cannot see, of what they cannot clearly know the evidence for. Our science and fancy gizmos and everything, we still operate just like we did back then. Even with all these viruses and pandemics going around these days, that's still a matter of faith. Most of us have not used a microscope to see the virus itself. We have faith in scientists and doctors who tell us what it is and how it's spread and how to treat it. That's still faith and hope in something we can't visually see for ourselves. It may be based off of a scientific understanding of the world rather than a religious one, but I'm not convinced that's better because it still has the same results. Washing your hands is washing your hands. It doesn't matter if God told you to do it or if the CDC. It's still just a good idea, even if you can't see the germs you're getting rid of. But I think we've got it better, if I may be so bold and arrogant, to have a direct line, as it were, to the creator of the universe, where of course he can tell you how to live responsible and healthy, as much as I may not sound like it this morning, because he created the universe, so he knows how it works, so he can give you the cheat codes, as it were. The reality of what we hope for. A better kingdom, a better promise. The evidence of things we cannot see. So anthemine to a modern mind to call faith evidence. But I think it's true. I think at this point, Abraham's faith is evidence for what God promises us, because the same God who can take Abraham out of his homeland, bring him to a new and better place, full of milk and honey, to take an old man, as good as dead, let's remember, and give him a great family that has blessed generation upon generation upon generation. I think that's evidence. I think Abraham, having the faith he did, and being rewarded in the way he was, I think that is proof that the God we serve is a kind God. He's a good God. He's competent at what he does, and then some. And I think that's a powerful promise to us this morning, that what he says and what he tells us to do, He will take care of. He's got the whole world in his hands, to quote a completely different song. So I think that about wraps us up for today. We'll move on with the story of Abraham next week. And I suppose I'll just ask in closing if anyone has any special need they want prayed for before we dismiss and enjoy some lunch.